Hello viewer, a warm welcome to Elimu TV where you watch and learn. I am a teacher, Madam Christine Okoth, taking you through biology Form 3. For all your questions or your feedbacks, you can SMS us on the number 40007. You can write to us on our Facebook page, which is Elimu TV, and you can also write to us. Our Twitter handle is at Elimu_KE. Let us have a preview of what we're going to learn in this lesson, or the activities in this lesson. First, we're going to review the previous assignment. Secondly, we're going to do an introduction to Protoctista. We're also going to look at the general characteristics of Protoctista. Then we're going to look at the importance of Protoctista. And finally, we're going to have an assignment. Starting with the previous assignment, I would like to thank some of you who wrote to us on our various pages, and the assignment was, what is the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction? And the answer is, first, you can review by starting to define reproduction. This is the production of new members of a species, replacing those who die due to the age, disease, or competition. So it is just the production of new members. It is divided into two main parts. So we have the sexual and the asexual. So asexual reproduction involves two parents who have sex organs which reproduce the sex cells. So this is reproduction through the sex cells, and they produce one offspring. Then asexual reproduction does not need two parents. So it is just one parent and there are no sex cells. Then the next assignment was bacteria that live in extreme conditions are known as, and the answer is Archibacteria. So we look at another kingdom we call the Protoctista. Remember in our previous lesson, the first kingdom was Monera, which is also known as the prokaryotes. So these ones we're looking at Protoctista. So this is a group of eukaryotic organisms. Eukaryotic means that it has the true nucleus compared to the prokaryotes that do not have the true nucleus like the bacteria. The cell body of Protoctista, they have a nucleus which is well defined and a membrane-bound organelles, a membrane like the mitochondrium, which have a membrane bound. Some are unicellular, it means that they have a single cell. They are organisms which are made of a single cell. Some are multicellular, the organisms are made of a number of cells. They do not have a specialized tissue organisms. These organisms, they are mostly found in the aquatic environment. They are also known as the protist. So you can refer to them as the protist or the Protoctista. So these organisms, these are difference between the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. So all of them, most of them are unicellular. It means they are organisms that are made up of only one cell. So the difference between prokaryotes and the eukaryotes, the prokaryotes, the nuclear envelope is absent, like the bacteria. They do not have the nuclear envelope. Like the DNA is just in the cells, does not have a membrane bound. Then the eukaryotes, their nuclear, it has an envelope present. The nuclear envelope is present in them. So going to look at the type of Protoctista, we can also refer to them as the protist. We have three types of protists. We have the protozoa, the algae, and the fungi-like protist. So the first one, the protozoas. These are animal-like protists. They resemble animals in the way they get food. They are all unicellular. So all these protozoa, they do not have the chlorophyll in them. So they get their food by depending on other organisms that can make their own food. Most of them are unicellular. So example of protozoas, we have the amoeba, we have the flagellates, we have the ciliates, and the spore forming. Then secondly, the second type of protist, we have the algae. These are plant-like protists. Why? Because they have the green we have the green matter we call the chlorophyll, so they photosynthesize to make their own food. An example of the algae, we have the red algae, brown algae, green algae, we have the diatoms, we have the dinoflagellates, and the euglenas. Then lastly, we have the fungi-like protists. So these are organisms, they decompose dead organisms. They are unlike fungi. Fungus like protists are able to move at some point in their life, and they do not have the chitin in their cell walls. Chitin is the organisms or the chemical which is found outside the organisms. So example of these fungi, we have the slime molds, we have the water molds, and the downy meal. So an example of all these are the molds that are found within the environment. So this is just a broad example of the animal-like protist. So we have the amoebas, amoeboid protozoans. These ones, they live in fresh water, seawater, or in moist soil. They move and capture their prey by putting out the pseudopodia. They have the false legs. So they move this, they use this false leg for movement. Example of this organism, we have the amoeba. We have marine forms like the silica shells. They have shells on their surfaces. Then another example, we have the flagellates. These are free-living or parasitics. They have the flagellae. Flagellae are the tail-like structures which these organisms use for movement. The parasitic form, they cause diseases like the sleeping sickness. We have an example, we have the trypanosoma. Then we have the ciliated protozoas. These ones are aquatic. They actively move using the cilia. Cilia are like the projection around the organisms, very small. They are hair-like structures. They help them in the process of movement. So due to the movement of cilia, water with food enters into the gullet. So example of this, we have the paramecium. Then lastly, we have the sporozoans. They have an infectious spore-like stage in their life cycle. An example of this is the plasmodium, which causes malaria. It is a malarial parasite. It causes malaria. So we're going to look at characteristics of the Protoctistas. How can you identify this type of organisms? One, they have a true nucleus which is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Such organisms are known as the eukaryote. So in our illustration, we have differentiating the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. You can look at the eukaryotes, they have a nuclear membrane, while the prokaryotes, like the bacteria, they do not have a nuclear membrane. So the DNA is just suspended within the cytoplasm. Then move to the second way in which we can identify a characteristic of Protoctista. This is in terms of their size. They vary in size. Some are microscopic. Some are microscopic, like the paramecium, the chlamydomonas, and the amoeba, while others are very large. They're large enough so you can see them without the use of the microscope. Example of this, we have the spirongyra. Still looking at the characteristics of the Protoctista, some of them, so this is in terms of the nutrition. Some organisms in this kingdom, they are autotrophic. It means that they can make their own food So they have the chloroplast, and hence they can carry out photosynthesis. So they have the green pigment in them, the chloroplast, which is responsible, or it's helpful in the process of photosynthesis. Example of these organisms, we have the Spirongyra, we have Chlamydomonas, Euglena, and the Volvox. Now looking at our illustration, we have an Euglena here. Then we can look at where the chloroplast is found within the organism. The green pigments in that diagram, those are the chloroplasts, which are responsible for the process of photosynthesis. Some of them are autotrophs while others are heterotrophs. It means they cannot make their own food. So others are heterotrophic. They take in food substances through their gullet-like. Example of this organism is Paramecium. Looking at illustration, we have an illustration of Paramecium. There's a place, it has a gullet. So this gullet, it uses it to take in food from within the environment. So they take in food because they are not in position to make their own food. While others, like the amoeba, they engulf tiny particles into their cytoplasm, forming food vacuole. So this process is known as phagocytosis. So we have the autotrophs, then we have the heterotrophs, then we have these types of organisms that they cannot make their own food, but they take in food through the process of phagocytosis. An example, we have an amoeba. Looking at in an illustration, an amoeba, it identifies a food particle. Then, so the plasma membrane, it will move towards the food particle. Then the food particle, it is entrenched in the inside. So these food particles, it forms a food vacuole within them. So there's a formation. The second thing, we have the formation of the food vacuole within the cytoplasm. Then there is fusion of the lysosomes with the food vacuole. So finally, this food is digested. So this is how the amoeba, they feed. The fourth characteristic of Protoctista is in terms of their forms. They exist in different forms. Some of them are single-celled. For example, we have the amoeba. It is just made of one cell. We have other organisms that live in colonies, like the volvos. So this one is just an example. It is found in the green algae family. Then we have others which are arranged in filaments, like the Spirongyra. Then lastly, we have some organisms in the Protoctista which are arranged in flat sheet-like structure, which are known as the thallus fucus, as it has been illustrated in the diagram. The fifth characteristic of Protoctista, we have in terms of the way they move. So we have some organisms in this kingdom. They move. They use specialized structures. For example, we have the Paramecium that uses cilia. We have flagella that is used by the Trypanosoma, and we have Sodo, which is used by the amoeba. We're going to look at example of each of these structures and how they move. The first one is the Paramecium. It uses the structure we call the cilia. The cilia is the outermost hairy-like structure found at the outer surface of the cells. So these are like hair projections. They move when they move against a substance, it gets a grip of it and it helps it in the process of moving. So the Paramecium, they use the cilia, which are the structures outside the cells. Then secondly, we have the flagella, which are found in the Trypanosoma. So this is the tail-like structure at the end of the organism. So it uses it to move within the organisms or within the environment. So there is an illustration of a trypanosoma trying to move within the red blood cells using the structure which is known as the flagella. This structure is also found in the bacteria. And lastly, we have the amoeba. It uses the pseudo. Pseudo is a word that means false. So they use the false legs to move around. If you look at the structure, it has been illustrated, the pseudo. So these are like a false leg, but they use this false leg for movement. Another characteristic of Protoctista, it is through reproduction. So reproduction, it's mainly by asexual. This is fusion or by fragmentation. Then second, they can also use sexual reproduction, which is very rare, but if it is used, it is through conjugation. So this is just like the fusing together to form one organisms, and then they transfer one organism's content. The first illustration illustrates the asexual reproduction, a process known as binary fusion. So we just have one parent cell, then that cell subdivides its contents, the DNA structure and everything, then it divides into two. Then finally you have you still have the parent cell, then you have the daughter cell, which is the amoeba. So that is one way in which they reproduce. Then secondly, we have fragmentation. So just from the word fragments, we have a parent cell, then it cuts itself into parts. So those parts, they are the new parts of the organism. So that is another form of reproduction by the Protoctista. Then the last one, which is asexual, which is very rare in these types of organism. So that is just, it's called conjugation. It is the fusion of two organisms to form one. Then when they fuse together, they transfer organisms' content to each other. Another characteristic of Protoctista, it's by looking at their nucleus. Their nucleus, they have many chromosomes in the form of the DNA that is combined with the proteins. So if you look at their structure, remember we said they are eukaryotics. The nucleus, they have the membrane bound. So these chromosomes are in the form of DNA, which combines with a molecule of protein. Another characteristic is through respiration. So respiration is just the breaking down of food material to release oxygen, to release energy by the use of oxygen. So cellular respiration is primarily aerobic process. So aerobic is when the organisms, they will need the presence of oxygen. While most of them live in mud or below the ponds or in our digestive tracts of animals. So these ones are strictly facultative anaerobes. They do not need oxygen. So these ones, they're just strictly facultative anaerobes, while some are aerobic. The other characteristic of Protoctista, some of them are pathogens of both animals and plants. It means that they cause diseases or they are harmful while they are present in bodies of either animals or plants. Example, we have the Plasmodium falciparum, which causes malaria in humans. So an illustration, this is just a cycle of how malaria is spread from one person to the other. So what is responsible for the spread of malaria is it's an organism of the Protoctista family known as Plasmodium falciparum. So firstly, it infects the red blood cell of a human being. So after it has infected the red cell, they infects mosquito, so it infects another one by biting the human being. So by injecting the saliva that contains their Plasmodium falciparum, then it goes down to the liver. So when the liver bursts, it releases these types of organisms which spread throughout the human being and causes it to have the disease we call commonly known as malaria. Then the other characteristic of Protoctista, they are very diverse. Most of these Protoctista, they live in water. Some of them live in moist soil or even in the bodies of human and plants. So we have an example of the Protist which is living in a moist area. Then we have others that live in large water bodies. An example we have that is the red algae. Then we have other organisms of the Protist family that live within the human species, especially at the alimentary canal and specifically at the large intestine. Some of them are very useful because they help to keep off the harmful bacteria. Mutual relationship between them and human beings because they get a place to stay in, it's their habitat, while in turn they help to keep the harmful bacteria away. So we look at the importance of Protoctista. There are some which are harmful, but there are some which are beneficial to the ecosystem and the human beings at large. So the first important thing is in relationship to ecological roles. Number one, they provide an essential food base in aquatic food chain. So some of them, they are used as food items by other organisms, especially the aquatic organisms. Then they carry out more than 30 to 40% of the Earth's photosynthesis. Remember, some of them are autotrophs. They have the green pigment, so they can make their own food. So that food constitutes to 30 to 40% of the Earth's photosynthesis. Then we have the protozoans, which help keep the number of bacteria in check, the ones which live along the alimentary canal, especially the large intestine. So we look at the benefits of the Protoctista. We have said that they are a major source of food in the aquatic ecosystem. Then we have the phytoplanktons, which help in the production of oxygen that we inhale. Then the red algae, they're also a source of food. Now let us look at the harmful effects of the Protist. Number one, they cause diseases like malaria and the African sleeping sickness. Then we have the algal, which kills the fish in the aquatic system. Then we have this type of protist we call the dinoflagellates. They kill the fish and other organisms with toxins during the red tides. So we have talked of some of them being harmful because they cause diseases. An example, we have the malaria, amoebic dysentery, and the sleeping sickness. So these are some of just the importance and the harmful effects. There are more of them. So that has been our lesson for today. And I'll leave you with an assignment. I would like you to state and explain the main groups of prototists. Then the second assignment, what is the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration?